Hey everyone, how are we all doing today? I've got an awesome video coming your guys' way today. I went out on a hike the other day, early in the morning, 3 a.m., 4 a.m. to get some blue hour shots, and I figured why not make a video about how I go about color grading moody, dark, blue hour footage. As far as color grading goes, everyone does it differently. This video is going to be a lot of fun because I'm going to walk you guys through each clip, no LUTs, from scratch, from start to finish. We're just going to color grade the footage together, and I have some great tips that I think you guys will appreciate and definitely can use in your future color grading for your videos. So let's dive straight into the color grading, and I'm going to walk you guys step by step through the sequence. So starting from the first clip here, what we want to do is make sure that we have our Lumetri scope section open, which you can do by making sure that you go up to Window, click Lumetri scopes. That way we can see the scopes here. Now when you're first opening your clips, take a look at this section here. I shoot in S-Log3, so this footage is all really flat, so we got to push and pull the colors and add contrast to it and saturation. I do want to note right off the bat that this point right here, as we get closer to 100, that point is the clipping point for your highlights or the brightest parts of your image. On the opposite spectrum, we have 0, which is the darkest parts of your image, your blacks, your shadows. You go below that, you're going to be clipping those shadows and your blacks as well. So right away, I'm going to go into my curves tab here. I'm going to drag down this accordingly, as close as we can get to 0 without it clipping. I'm going to select this middle point and bring it back up here. And now I want these bright parts of the image to still stand out. So I'm going to make another curve up top here, bump that, which will add some contrast back to our image. Now if we go into the basic correction here, I'm going to maybe bring my blacks down just a little bit more, just a hair. We're riding that fine line. I'm going to add back some saturation. I think like 130 will be good. I'm going to bump up the highlights, and we're watching this point here. I'm going to bring those shadows way down, bring the contrast up to really spread that image out. Now you can see that we're clipping here in the dark points. I'm going to go back to my curves, bring this out a little bit just so we're not clipping as much. Then we have some more wiggle room to bring those shadows down a little bit more. I personally like to manually adjust my white balance to the kind of look that I want for the clip. So in this case, we're shooting in blue hours, so I'm going to bring this down to the blues a little bit, maybe just a little bit of green as well. Now I want to emphasize the blue that we have here in the sky, so I'm going to go into my hue versus saturation curve, select the color. I'm going to bump up the saturation of it a bit, spread out that selection just a tad. And I feel like the blue is maybe just a tad too bright. I did want to add saturation to it. Let's make it a little bit darker. I'm just gonna make a general selection here around the color range and bring this down just a tad bit to darken it up. Now under the Luma versus saturation tab, I'm gonna desaturate all of the darkest parts of the image, so the blacks and the whites, so we get a perfect white and perfect black. This is already starting to look pretty darn cool. Now I'm gonna bring down the curves even more here and squash those shadows, move this up just a bit. Again, we're riding that line of 0. And now I think there's a little bit of warmth still left in the image here, so I'm gonna go into my red tab, bring down the red accordingly, just so we get rid of all of that. You can see the change that it makes if we go all the way down. I'm gonna bring it down maybe like right here. I want to add a little bit of green to the shadows, maybe a tad bit of green to the highlights as well. Play with these scroll wheels accordingly. I want to bring down those highlights just a tad. Shadows, I'm going to bring down just a little bit as well, just before they get to that clipping point, which we're riding pretty close here. Now the icing on the cake is using this vignette tool right here. And the way that I keep an eye on how this vignette actually looks is I lower the feather all the way, and I adjust the size and midpoint and roundness of it accordingly. I'm going to bring the midpoint out a little bit, start feathering that up quite a bit. We bring that midpoint in so it really fades in the sides of the image. Now if we play through it, we've got this really nice moody looking clip. Looks awesome. Now I personally love working with those desaturated greens, but when I'm in an environment like this, the greens are just like popping. So I really want to get that color. So let's go through the same steps again here. We have a flat profile. Again, we're shooting in S-Log3. First, I'm going to go into my curves as we did last time. I want to bring this point down quite a bit, bring the middle back up, and then add some more contrast in the highlighted areas, the brighter parts of the image. Go back into my basic correction here, and I'm going to start adding some more highlights. Bring down the shadows, And this is already a pretty dark image, so like we're not looking to bump up the brightness of it a lot, but I do often bump it up just to add some more contrast into it. And then if I want to change it, I'll go back into it later. Let's add some saturation into that image. Bring that black point down as far as we can here. Squash those shadows even more and start adding some contrast. Go back into our curves because we're clipping in the black, so we're going to up that just a tad. Bring down those shadows even more. Maybe adjust the contrast just a little bit more. Now I'm going to select the color green here, widen the selection, and I'm going to desaturate it a little bit because I like that desaturated green look. I'm also going to bring down the blue because we're shooting blue hour and I don't want any blue to be showing up in the image. Now we did just desaturate the greens, but I'm going to bring the hue sliders down a little bit just to kind of add some more richness and coolness to the greens. Again, we're going to desaturate those darkest parts of the image and the brightest parts of the image here. I might even up this to bring some more contrast and darken these dark parts again. I just love that contrast. We're really dark here and we are clipping, so I think I need to ease this out just a tad bit more. Now, as we did before, I'm going to add a little green into the shadows, which I barely move my cursor here, and you can see the difference that it makes as we go farther and farther, but I really only want a little bit. We did subtract the blue in the curves, but in the highlights, I'm actually going to add a little bit of blue back into it just so those greens are a little bit cooler. And I want to up those highlights a little bit because we're going to bring down the shadows here and really crush this. Now I'm going to go into the HSL secondary tool here and set the color accordingly to the green here, which we're going to expand and mess around with as we go and move these cursors. Blur it a little bit. Denoise it. I want to very lightly sharpen the leaves here because we're up so close and I feel like it just looks really nice and sharp. And by applying this mask to the color range that we have here, it will sharpen only the portions that we have selected. I'm only going to add like 10 sharpenings. Not a lot, but just a little bit to make enough of a difference. And I think I'm just going to add a little bit more saturation back into those greens. Now this is going to be a little bit of a challenge because we have the sky, we have the mountains, we have the subjects, me and my buddy Matt. So we have skin tones that we have to work around. So let's work around it, go step by step through it here. Same as we've been doing. We're going to bring down this curve point, leave a little bit of wiggle room, start brightening up the areas up here. We want to keep those bright parts up right there. Bring down this curve just a little more. Start moving that contrast a little bit to spread the brightest and darkest parts of the image. I am going to white balance the clip here using the sky because it's more or less gray. We'll add some saturation back into the image. I think 130 is probably good. Now again, I'm going to make those points and desaturate the greens a little bit. I do want those blues to stand out, so we're going to up the blues here by making a wide selection as I did, and you can see it's changing the sky in the back along with the mountains. And you can make sure that you don't mess up your skin tones by marking them off with the eyedropper. So if you click it and then you click your skin tones, you can see the selection here, and we do look pretty pale, and most people use the Lumetri scopes here to eyeball that skin tone line. I'm just going to use best judgment here and up that a little bit just so we have some more color back into our skin. Again, we're going to desaturate those blacks, desaturate the whites. We are pretty darn close to clipping here in the blacks, so we're going to bring that and then bring this down a little bit. Now I want to keep my highlights up because I want the sky to be sticking out, but I want us to be pretty dark here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring down the exposure just a tad. Let's bump some green into the shadows as we've been doing. Only a little bit. Mid-tones, I actually want a little bit of blue. And for the highlights in this, the sky was actually a little bit orange, but you can't tell because we haven't pushed those colors yet. So I'm going to push the highlights towards the red and orange area, just so we get some more of that warmth back in the image. I'm even going to bring down the shadows like just a little bit and brighten those highlights a little more. And there's still a little bit of green in this from the shadow change, so we're going to go into our midtones and add a little bit more blue back into it because again, this is blue hour. And then I'm actually going to click and drag the Lumetri color back onto this clip, and we're going to do another mask here in the sky because I want to add some more warmth back into it. So I'm going to mask the sky here by clicking and dragging my mouse to make the lines, Control-Zing if you feel like you need to undo one of your selections, bring this back up to size, and we're going to start adding some more warmth back into that sky. And look how much of a difference that makes. It's crazy. And if we go back and look at our Lumetri scopes here, we're riding that black point just a little bit, maybe just a little bit too crushed, but I feel like it looks pretty solid, nevertheless. For our last clip here, this one's got a lot of greens. It's a little bit brighter, so it's gonna go a little bit differently. We got quite a bit of room to stretch some stuff. So let's go into our curves, start bringing that down, midpoint back up, making another point here. Adding some more contrast by bringing up this point of the curve. Add some saturation back into it. I think 130 is good. Bring those blacks down, start bringing down the shadows. Bring up the highlights and stretch it using the contrast option here. And the greens are looking a little bit dark right now. I'm actually going to remove these points by pressing Control and then left clicking and then just making the selection a bit wider. And we're going to bump some more green into these greens just a little bit. And I want the greens to be a little bit darker, so I'm going to go into the hue versus luma, which is a dangerous tool if you push it too hard. We're just going to bring down the greens and the yellow parts of it. Again, desaturating the blacks and the whites. Go back into our color wheels. We want to add some green into the shadows. Highlights, we can add a little bit of blue just to cool down those greens. Midtones, I'm going to pump up just a tad bit and then bring those shadows back down. Maybe even bring the highlights down just a tad bit and start adding that vignette back to our image. Maybe even up the highlights just a tad more to get some more brightness to that image. And the whites, that looks pretty solid. So that's how I went about color grading some of these clips. I hope I was able to walk you guys through it and it was easy to understand. This is my first time shooting Blue Hour, so it's really my first time color grading in it too. So I'm definitely not perfect with it. I'm not claiming to be like a professional colorist. This is just kind of how I went about doing it. That's what worked for me. So as always, thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions or tips on color grading, definitely leave them in the comments below. Let me know what you guys thought. And as always, thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.